Created with free version for non-commercial use.
In this lesson, we will learn about CSS typography. Typography is the art of arranging type or text so that it is easy to read and supports the overall design of a project. By this point in the course, you are fairly familiar with CSS. We've seen properties like font size and text align. So you've had a small taste of manipulating text. Well, in this lesson, we will learn about many more tools to style text in the exact way that we want. Let's get started. In front of you is an example page, and let's imagine that we want to change the overall font that the page uses. We know from earlier lessons that we can use the font family property to define a font stack. If a computer or device does not have the first font that we list, it will fall back and use the next font. Now, a key concept in the font stack is to make sure that the last item in your list is not a font in and of itself, but is instead a keyword. So if a device does not have Tahoma installed, it will use this keyword to use whatever system default sans serif font it wants to use. So one of the most common font stacks is to try and use Helvetica, and if that's not available, then we'll use Arial, and if that's not available, then we'll just let the browser use whatever system default sans serif font it wants to use. So if we save, we can see that the web page is now using Helvetica. Now let's imagine that we didn't want to use sans serif fonts and we instead wanted to use serif fonts. So our first pick would probably be Georgia, and if that wasn't available, we'll use Times New Roman. And then if that's not available, we'll let the browser choose whatever serif system default font it would like. Now, if you do not want to limit yourself to fonts that are installed on someone's device, you can use a technology named @FontFace to use any font that you have license to use. We will cover that in our next lesson, but for now, let's continue reviewing basic typography. Moving on, we know that we can control the size of text by using the font size property. Now, when it comes to values for this property, we have many different units of measurement at our disposal. So we can use percentages, or we can use pixels, so 17 pixels, or we can use keywords, so we could say small, or medium. Now, there is no right or wrong method or unit of measurement. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. But the key concept, regardless of which route you choose, is that you define a baseline size on either your body or HTML element so that it can trickle down to every element on your page. So for example, if we set the body element to use 15 pixels, we can see that that establishes a baseline. So that affects the entire page. Now, if we wanted to affect the size of this heading, it's an H2 element in the main column, we can simply select that using CSS, and then we can provide a multiplier. So we can say that relative to the baseline font size, we want that heading level 2 element to be 200%. And perhaps we decide that paragraph text in the main column should be just a small bit larger than the baseline. So we can target that with this selector, and then we can say font size 108%, so just a little bit larger than the baseline. Now again, there is no right or wrong way to size your fonts. But the key concept that almost every method has in common is that you define a baseline size on one of the root elements of the page, and then you multiply or manipulate that baseline size on different elements throughout the page. That's enough on font size for the moment. Now let's review other CSS properties. To manage the boldness of text, we can use the font weight property. So if we didn't want this heading to be bold, we can say font weight normal. If we wanted the heading to be italic, we can use a property named font style and provide a value of italic. If we want to control the space between each individual letter, we can use a property named letter spacing. And then we simply specify how much space we want between each letter. So if I say 4 pixels, there's now 4 pixels of extra space between each letter. On a similar note, if we want to control the spacing between each word, there's a property named word spacing. So if I say 10 pixels, there's an extra 10 pixels between each word. If we want to add a shadow to text, we can use a property named text shadow. This property accepts 4 values. The first value controls the horizontal offset of the shadow, or in other words, how far from the left of the regular text the shadow text should sit. The second value controls the vertical offset of the shadow. The third value controls the blur radius. If we include a 0, the text will not be blurred at all. And the fourth value controls the color of the shadow. So I will include a hexadecimal color code for a medium gray. So if we increase this third value, the blur radius value, to 3 pixels, we can see the text is a bit blurred. And if we increase this quite a bit, it's very blurred. We can also use a RGBA color instead of a hexadecimal color code. So I could use the code for black and then set the transparency to 50%, and we can see we get a similar effect. Moving on, if we wanted this header to use all capital letters without editing the HTML, we can use a property named text transform and provide a value of uppercase. The property also accepts a value of lowercase. If we want text to have an underline, we can use a property named text decoration and provide it a value of underline. However, you should not do this because in the context of web browsers and web pages, we automatically assume that underline means something is a link. So I recommend not adding that to any elements other than links. However, if you wanted to remove the underline from a link, we can simply target link elements on the page and type in text decoration none. And that will remove underlines from an element. Now, let's focus a bit on styling the paragraphs of our page. We can control the way that text is aligned using the text align property. So if we say right, the text will sit to the right. Center will obviously center the text. Justify will create almost a newspaper column effect where the text is perfectly spaced per line to create a hard and clean edge on the right. And obviously the default value for text align is left. If you want to indent the beginning of a paragraph, you can use a property named text indent. Actually, you can use this on any element, not just a paragraph. And then specify how much you would like to indent. Now I've saved arguably one of the most vital properties for last. One of the most important parts of typography is creating a vertical rhythm. And a very important part of vertical rhythm is line spacing or leading. This refers to the space between each line of text. Now in CSS, there's a property named line height. So if I give this a value of 1.5, we can see that there's extra space between each line. Now obviously, we can target individual elements, so this rule is targeting paragraphs in the main column, or you can target the HTML or body elements so that this will trickle down to your entire page, so that you can establish a baseline line height. So if we include this here, now we can see that even in our sidebar and our heading, everywhere, the entire page now has leading or a line height of 1.5. If we want to increase this a bit, we can say 1.7. It's up to you to choose a value that works with your design and will also provide excellent readability for your users. That's going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we will learn how to not be limited by fonts that are installed on a user's device, but instead unlock the potential to use any font that you have the license to use. I will see you in the next lesson.
Created with free version for non-commercial use.